grab your tinfoil hat and your crystal balls. It's time to predict the 2018 Formula 1 driver lineups. Joining me today, we got Matty Bolton, we got Matt212, and we have Benny as well. How are you guys doing today?
I've got my tinfoil hat ready.
We're going to waste no time. We're going to go straight into it. Benny, your prediction for Mercedes, go.
For Mercedes, of course, Hamilton's already got a contract, so I think he's gonna stay, and I think they're gonna keep Bottas, as at the moment he's probably the best choice for the second Mercedes seat.
Both the Matts, any doubt about it being Hamilton and Bottas next year?
I think there's probably a little bit of doubt with Bottas, but so far the partnership seems to be working very well. I guess with Formula 1 driver partnerships, the kind of minimum you ask for is for there to be no dispute, and so far there hasn't really been any. So there is a kind of element that Bottas is sort of the second driver in this scenario, although it's not really confirmed. But I can't see, that they're in a pretty stable relationship at the moment. I think that's the most you can ask for with a F1 team.
I think there's no real doubt, really, in my eyes, that they're going to keep their two drivers. As Matt said, Bottas is sort of a number two driver, but I think for him to obviously get the Mercedes seat in the first place was pretty impressive, so he can't really get in, flex his muscles and try and barge, especially someone like Lewis Hamilton out of the way. And so, yeah, I think Mercedes are going to be very safe with Bottas and Hamilton for the next couple of years.
Yeah, I think it's a really, really solid lineup. Arguably even better than Hamilton and Rosberg, to be fair, because there aren't those disputes that Matty talked about. So yeah, definitely Hamilton, Bottas for me. Red Bull, Ricciardo and Verstappen for me as well. Any doubt about that?
I think there's a little bit of doubt whether Ricciardo could be on the move, although I think it's unlikely. With him still having 1 year left on his contract, I think Verstappen moving is not really possible because it would cost way too much to buy him out. He's got more than 2 or 3 years left on his contract, so to buy him out would cost a rather large sum of money. But to get Ricciardo out, but then it kind of brings into question where Ricciardo would even go, and whether, like we'll probably talk about in a little bit, the Raikkonen situation, which always seems to crop up every year. But I think I put down Sainz as a possibility here, but that hugely relies on Ricciardo leaving Red Bull.
Yeah, I think it's gonna be the same lineup as this year. I think they're not gonna buy out any contracts.
I have to sort of don't get me wrong, I feel that Red Bull will probably keep their driver lineup, but to be honest, I'd be less surprised if Verstappen moved teams than Ricciardo. I think it's safe to say that, Verstappen's probably had the grunt of the engine worries this year. And although obviously when they get angry over team radio and stuff, you like to blow it up and make it out like he's going to leave next week and things. But I think Verstappen, in my eyes, would probably be more likely to move if, say, we've mentioned Raikkonen already, if, say, the Ferrari power unit was really good and obviously reliable like it's shown at the moment, I wouldn't be surprised if, Ferrari went to Verstappen, look what we have and look what you don't.
Yeah, I'm going to completely disagree and say Ricciardo's more likely to leave. Let's move on to Ferrari, and the big issue, I think, of course, with this one is Kimi Raikkonen. I think it's pretty fair to say that Vettel's going to stay on, but will Kimi Raikkonen stay? Let's start off with a man who knows Kimi Raikkonen very well, Benny.
Yeah, I think this lineup is perfect for what Ferrari normally aim for. Historically, for most seasons, Ferrari always had a number one driver and a number two driver, and I think in this case it works quite well. And Kimi's performances, even though some say they should have been way better, I think they're still quite good enough for him to keep his seat for another season. And he seems motivated, and last season he outqualified Vettel, getting some brilliant qualifying efforts in, and this season he's been solid as well. And I think the pole in Monaco just shows that he's still got it, and he just needs to get his setup right, and then we'll see him challenging for victories again. So he's gonna stay.
Matt, do you not think Ferrari might be a little tempted to put Sainz in there, maybe put Perez, maybe Grosjean?
I think Ferrari will be thinking that they've kind of already got the driver lineup they ideally want. They've got limited friction between the drivers. The drivers speak to each other. The drivers like each other, and they kind of understand the rules that they've got. Raikkonen obviously may not be particularly happy with the way things are kind of turning out, but I think he kind of knows and has accepted that his position isn't really to challenge Sebastian Vettel. So I don't think Raikkonen leaving Ferrari is as likely as people are making it out to be. But I do agree that obviously there is a wealth of drivers lined up for that position, and you've got Sainz, Grosjean, Ricciardo, Perez, to name a few. You could pretty much link any driver on the grid with that drive. And I guess if I was going to choose one, apart from Raikkonen, who could take the seat, I think I'd be slightly inclined to saying Sainz would be ready to take up his spot.
Yeah, I've got to agree there. Obviously Perez as well, probably consideration is Ricciardo as well, like you mentioned. Matt, who do you think is most likely, even if you do think Raikkonen's going to stay, who's most likely to partner Vettel next season, if not Raikkonen?
I'm probably going to have to be the boring response and say Raikkonen in all honesty, but if he came out and said he was retiring, I think I'd be most inclined to say Perez. Now obviously this is being recorded after Baku, and obviously the Force Indias did have a bit of a clash, and I know obviously Sainz is trying to get out of that Red Bull sort of stronghold at the moment, but I think Perez, out of all of them, would probably be my likely response as to who will fill that Ferrari seat if Raikkonen was to retire.
Let's move on to Force India then. Of course, their current lineup is Sergio Perez and Esteban Ocon. Ocon does have a deal for next year. Perez, of course, on the other hand, is kind of looking elsewhere, possibly Renault, possibly Ferrari. Matty, do you see Perez staying next year?
I see him staying next year. I think Force India will definitely want him staying next year. Obviously talking about Ocon before, he's tied down, so there's not really much movement there. The whole Perez thing kind of relies on Raikkonen's position, and like you said, the Renault situation, and what is assumably going to happen with Palmer's vacancy, which I assume will come up at the end of this year. That although does rely on more drivers, and it's kind of a theme of these videos is that a lot, well, as the driver market goes, driver movement relies on driver movement. So we're waiting for that first domino to fall to kind of kickstart everything. But in terms of getting the Renault seat, we're kind of, I'd say he's probably in competition there with Alonso, which we'll talk about in a little bit once we get onto Renault. But if he were to leave and someone were to take his seat, you'd probably be looking at someone like Wehrlein. A real outsider would be Sellis Jr., but we were talking about this before the podcast, and I think we unanimously agreed that Sellis doesn't really have the pace.
Yeah, I've got to agree there. Perez and Ocon for me. Ocon I think has been lined up for a future Mercedes seat, and then it's a very kind of 50-50 whether Perez gets that Ferrari seat or not, possibly a Renault as well. But of course, I think Perez, like you mentioned, really he's very much dependent on what Raikkonen and Alonso do next year. How do you see that one playing out, Benny?
I'm not quite sure, but I think Perez is gonna stay next year. I think Ferrari definitely want a team player as their second driver, and as we've seen in Canada, Perez hasn't exactly shown to be it, I don't think he's the right fit for the Ferrari seat, and I don't see him fitting in at Renault either. I just don't think he's got the temperament for that team, so I think he's just gonna stay at Force India for another season.
Matt?
I think, to go against Benny, I think, he's still definitely got that team spirit to him. He's obviously an incredibly quick driver, and I think, obviously, that was sort of just a one-off. And although that might sort of hamper his chances of getting a different team, I do feel that he still will probably stay at Force India next year. He'll try and sniff around a bit, see what he can try and find. But I think Force India, for him at the moment, is probably one of the safest bets on the grid. Obviously, they're a team that he's really obviously worked well with in the past and has a lot of success, and unless we see sort of like, as you've mentioned, Raikkonen leave the spot, I think Perez will stay at Force India.
Let's move on to McLaren, because this is probably, after Raikkonen, the second biggest kind of movement that could happen. Alonso, of course, not very happy at the moment. McLaren as well, of course, do have a contract with Honda at the moment, but that could be broken. They could be switching to Mercedes. I guess we kind of got to answer both questions. The first part, of course, the engine, and then second part, will Alonso stay? So that's quite a big one for you, Matty. We'll have to see when this is going to be answered. But for now, you'll just have to see what.
Well, I think one kind of influences the other, and if the sooner McLaren get a Mercedes deal sorted, the sooner they can attempt to get Alonso signed for a new contract. So I think if they do manage to get the Mercedes engine, Alonso I think will be inclined to stay. I'm not saying it's definite because he could be influenced by Renault. Obviously, the nostalgia there of winning 2 championships and having a decent spell, 2008 through 2009. May bring the rose-tinted glasses back to him. It kind of depends on what McLaren's outlook is for him and what they can almost promise to him over the next 2 years. Because I think being 3 years into this project now with Honda, I don't think Alonso's exactly where he expected he may have thought he would have been. I think definitely at this point in his head in 2014 he would have been thinking, yes, we're going to be challenging for at the very least podiums, not having a complete engine reshuffle and going into a season with even less power than they did in the previous. So I personally think that Alonso is more likely to move than stay, but obviously, like I said before, hugely dependent on the engine situation.
Beni, of course, we're talking about Alonso, but also do we have to consider Van Dorn in this? Because he's having a difficult start to the season, not showing the promise that was expected of him. There's quite a few other drivers around as well that are kind of looking for a top seat. Maybe McLaren would possibly think about replacing him. Of course, Honda do have a second team, so possibly there could be a bit of switch there with Van Dorn going down to Sauber maybe. Beni, do you think that's any kind of possibility that Van Dorn's future might not be safe?
Yeah, that's quite a possibility. I think that Van Dorn in the end are gonna stay. That this is gonna be finally the first driver that the first young driver that they've got confidence in to give him more than one season, even if he disappoints. Because in the past, they've had Perez, who didn't exactly have the most brilliant of seasons there, and Magnussen, who started the season off very well, but then kind of dropped off. But that was also the time of the start of the Mercedes domination. But in the end, I think Alonso's just too fed up with the whole team, with everything that happened with Honda, and so I think he's definitely gonna leave, no matter who they get for the engine partners. And I think in terms of the engine partner, I think in the end they're gonna go with Mercedes. It still is probably the best, if not, it's definitely one of the best power units around, if not the best. The Ferrari this season I think is close, but not quite there yet. So I think they're gonna have Mercedes power units in the end, and Van Dorn is gonna be one driver, and the other one, the tinfoil hat thing. Haas, we're gonna talk about them later, but they've got all of the Ferrari ties, so I don't think that, and Magnussen being confirmed, so I don't think that Grosjean will stay. I think that, Grosjean is gonna be forced to leave, and, I think he's in the end gonna be at McLaren somehow. He's a great driver, and, I think that they would be willing to offer him a contract, so in the end, my prediction, Mercedes powers McLaren with Van Dorn and Grosjean as the 2 drivers.
And where does Alonso go?
Well, we're going to talk about that team later.
Fair enough. Matt?
I'm going to have to unfortunately be quite boring. I think McLaren are going to go with Mercedes power units. They can't really afford to keep the Honda power units just because McLaren, they're a team that are meant to be winning, and I think obviously if they get the Mercedes power unit, then Alonso will stay. And I think it's going to be Alonso Van Dorn lining up next season, but I think they might have a talk with Van Dorn behind closed doors. The button's still always there to swoop back in if he's needed.
Yeah, hopefully not. But we'll have to see what happens at McLaren. I mean, for me, it's going to be. I'm agree with Matt. It's going to be Van Dorn and Alonso next year. A switch to Mercedes engines. Though I think it's going to be tough though in that first year, a bit of a transition year. I mean, theoretically they should be ahead of Williams in Force India. They're kind of other Mercedes customers. But really, could they kind of beat Mercedes with a customer engine? It's tough to see, but it's certainly probably be a lot better than the current situation at McLaren. So that's definitely one to keep an eye on. So I think we're kind of a bit split there between, Alonso staying and Alonso going. Let's move on to Toro Rosso. For me, it's going to be Danny Fiat, and then it's a bit of a spoiler for later on, but Pierre Gasly is going to be promoted because there will be a space at Toro Rosso. So I think Gasly's finally going to get his shot. Very long overdue, of course. Won the GP2 Championship. Was very impressive in Formula Renault 3.5. And really should have been in that Toro Rosso seat for this season, but unfortunately not going his way. Fiat hasn't been that bad though this year, and I think he's going to get a bit of a change in fortunes for the second half of the year, so should have a decent year, and there's no one else really that could replace Fiat if Gasly's promoted. I don't think any of the other Red Bull juniors are really ready, so unless they got someone in from the outside, which really isn't the Toro Rosso way, I think it's going to be Fiat and Gasly. Matt, what do you think of that one?
I'm going to have to go with quite a bold decision here. I reckon Kvyat is going to leave on his own terms at the end of the season, so I'm going to put Gasly, I think he's arguably the driver that will take the Toro Rosso seat if ever one gets freed up, but I'm also going to put Carey in there as well. A bit of a gamble, but I think Kvyat's going to leave on his own terms. Sainz is going to move elsewhere, and they're going to have two new fresh-faced drivers in. They can't keep Sainz and Kvyat there year upon year, knowing that they're not really going to get that Red Bull opportunity at the moment. Ricciardo and Verstappen are both so young. Well, I say so young, Ricciardo's 27 now. But I think, they're going to keep... The Toro Rosso are going to have to bring two new drivers in because Kvyat and Sainz know at that team they're really at a dead-end point in their career.
So, Benny, I'm feeling, of course, we can kind of guess where Alonso's going in your kind of plan, but we'll come on to that in a bit. But as for Toro Rosso, where do you see that one shaking out?
Well, I think I'm gonna... It's quite a difficult situation. It's definitely gonna be... No matter what happens, they're not gonna get a driver from the outside, in my opinion, so... I think I see Kvyat leaving, probably he's not even in Red Bull's plans anymore for, even if one of Ricciardo or Verstappen leaves at the end of next season, they're not gonna call upon him, so I think Kvyat's gonna go, and he's not gonna drive for Toro Rosso next season, but I think Sainz is gonna stay. I think they're gonna do a lot to try to persuade Sainz to, to still drive for them next season, and, they're definitely should do, he's really quick and really talented, so I think he's gonna stay. As for the second seat, I think it's gonna be Gasly's turn finally. He's gone to Super Formula this season because he couldn't get an F1 seat, but next season I think he's gonna get it.
Matthew, we'll come on to Williams and Renault in a second, but just a quick word on Toro Rosso.
Kind of largely agree with Benny, although I'd say again, dependent on if Sainz moves teams. So if Sainz moves, I think Fiat's seat is safe. Either way, I think Gasly's going to take a seat. But I think it's likely going to be Gasly and Sainz with Kvyat getting dropped.
Right, let's move on to Renault then, and then we'll come on to Williams. For me, it's going to be Nico Hülkenberg, and then Carlos Sainz, I believe, is going to move there. I think he's going to kind of be fed up of Toro Rosso, and I think for Renault, he's a very attractive prospect. They're probably going to look at Perez as well, but for me, I think they're going to go with Sainz. A bit of Hülkenberg and Perez reunion. I can't really see that happening, again, after the time they had. Hülkenberg's very strong, though, so I think, Sainz would really complement that very, very well. Hülkenberg and Sainz for me. Matt, how do you see, Renault's kind of driver lineup for next year looking?
It's going to be hard for me because, unfortunately, I am very much a Palmer fan. I've made that very clear in the past, and I think, unfortunately, he hasn't been exactly performing strongly in comparison to Hülkenberg, and I think, the engine hasn't exactly been helping him, but I wouldn't be surprised if he went to somewhere like Sauber next year, but I think Hülkenberg, he's going to stay. And to be honest, I've got Palmer down on my prediction list, but I think that might be a little bit too much tinfoil hat to handle.
Yes, that's ambitious, I think is the word. Optimistic is possibly the word. Benny, I wonder who you got at Renault.
Well, I've got Alonso, so I think... people should have puzzled it out that I said about who I put in the Toro Rosso and that I put them out of the McLaren. So I think Alonso, as I said, he's sick of the McLaren team, so he's gonna be searching for another seat. I don't see him going to Ferrari, but maybe they could do. But I think that Ferrari, as I said, the number 1 driver and the number 2 driver situation, he's not gonna, neither him or Vettel are gonna want to play ball to be the number 2 driver. So yeah, I think the most logical destination in the end is Renault. They've got a huge budget, to develop the car, and probably some talented personnel. And Hulkenberg's shown that the car's got some promise. It just needs a little bit more. And I think Alonso in the end is the perfect guy to, develop the car a bit more and to get them back to winning ways like they were back in the early 2000s.
Well, I agree with Benny that that's likely going to be Alonso in that second seat, unfortunately for Palmer. But there are a few other names who you could arguably throw in there. Obviously, from GP2, you've got Sorokin, you've even got Ollie Rowland, but I don't feel like they're exactly ready yet for the seat. So maybe in a year or two they could be fighting for that. But as of now, not. I mean, they're having decently strong seasons, especially Rowland being up in second in the championship, but I just don't think the market's open for them yet to be going for an F1 seat, or at least an F1 seat at Renault. And obviously, as we mentioned before, Perez, although I see him staying at Force India or going off to Ferrari over Renault. So, yeah, agreeing with Benny, Hulkenberg and Alonso.
Right, Williams then, we've neglected them for way too long, so let's talk about them now. Felipe Massa and Lance Stroll, of course, their current lineup, and for me, it will be the 2018 lineup. Does anyone disagree with that?
No.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, go on then for the yeses. Start with you, Benny.
Well, I think they're gonna keep Stroll. He's a talent and he's been getting better and better. In the end, the drive and he put in at Baku. He didn't make silly mistakes. He didn't hit the wall. And he even at the end of the race when Bottas was catching, and he had a really solid pace. I think it was really close to Ricciardo's. And as for Massa, I don't see him staying. I think he wants to stay a bit, but I just don't see Williams giving him another year. This year was already a stretch. He said that he was gonna retire, which also probably I might be a bit biased because of that. But yeah, I think for the second seed, it's gonna be quite a surprising one in the end. I think it's gonna be Kvyat. I think he is talented and he is probably gonna leave Toro Rosso, and I think Williams are willing to give him a shot. He's had some really good drives in the past. Not really in the Toro Rosso. They were really flashes of brilliance in Toro Rosso. But in the Red Bull, at the start of 2016 in China, he put in a really good drive. So I think that somebody's going to remember that and they're going to give Kvyat a shot.
If I can just disagree with that for a second, I don't think Kvyat could even be up for consideration for the seat because I'm not sure if he's 25. And the whole Martini sponsorship kind of relies on there being one driver over 25, which is the whole reason why Massa was brought back.
Yeah, that is very true. And of course, yeah, he's 23 at the moment.
Yeah, I guess, but
and obviously it's Lance Stroll. Isn't the whole team built around Stroll as well? So they've got to get someone experienced enough to kind of, teach.
And it's at that point where I would chuck in Grosjean into the equation.
Yes, wow, that could definitely work, couldn't it? Who else could you put in there? I mean, again, Verlan's the same issues in it, really, as Fiat. A lot of talent, but he's just not really fitting that role. So we're in a bit of a similar situation to last year, aren't we, really? But yeah, that's an interesting prediction anyway for Fiat or possibly Grosjean. Is that your prediction, Matty? Do you think Grosjean's going to Williams, or is that just if Massa leaves?
That's only if Massa leaves, and I half expecting Massa to stay on next year.
Yeah, same. Matt, did you also think Massa was going to leave, or Stroll's going to leave?
I thought Massa was going to leave, but I was going to say Stroll and Sainz until obviously Matty pointed out the whole thing about Martini. I don't think I would be surprised if Sainz is over 25.
Surely they can make an
honesty.
exception. This is Carlos Sainz. This is future world champion Carlos Sainz.
Yeah, it's the Spanish Lord Carlos Sainz. But I think I was going to say him. I think now Matt said that. I think it's going to have to be Master again, unfortunately, for Williams. He's going to be there till like 2025 at this rate, until Stroll's old enough to be a big boy by himself.
So I guess this kind of alters your Toro Rosso prediction as well. Maybe we're moving Sainz back to.
Yeah, I think this is gonna completely go back on itself now. All these advertising laws are gonna have to basically go back to square one.
I'll think about the teams. They've got to think about these things as well. But should we move on to Haas?
Well, obviously Magnussen, I think, is pretty much nigh on to stay there. But we've got Grosjean in the mix, and then also, surprised we haven't mentioned his name yet so far, Charles Leclerc. Obviously Ferrari junior driver and current GP2 championship leader, who is having an extremely strong season, and it looks as if Haas is probably going to be his only route into an F1 seat.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I really want Leclerc in there, but it's just kind of a case of where can he fit in? That's kind of why I hope Raikkonen, steps back, and this is really going to kind of free up the driver market a bit, and then spaces will be available for people like Gasly and Leclerc. So, Matt, do you think there's a space for Leclerc, or do you think it'll be Grosjean or Magnussen?
I don't think there is a space for Leclerc, and I think, Grosjean and Magnussen probably the lineup that they'll stick with for a couple more years. They could sort of turn Haas into a Ferrari Toro Rosso, if you will, but I think they're going to keep Grosjean and Magnussen for another season, and if Grosjean starts looking elsewhere, because I think by 2019, obviously we're getting too far in the future, but I think Raikkonen might leave by then. That'll free it all up, and then Leclerc will get his chance somewhere or another. But I think for the moment, Grosjean and Magnussen will stay at Haas next season.
I think I'm going to go with Leclerc getting into F1 with Haas. Ferrari have got quite a big influence in Haas with being their technology partner, and if not technology partner, at least their engine supplier. And I think they could pressure Haas into getting Leclerc a seat. Magnussen's already got a contract, so he's probably gonna stay. And for Grosjean, I've said that he's gonna leave because of the Ferrari pressure. And I think Ferrari could do the pressure thing. They could say if you get Leclerc, you can get the engines for a couple of million less. And in these times when finances aren't exactly the best thing for F1, I think that could be quite a good financial prospect. So my prediction: Magnussen and Leclerc.
And of course you get a great driver as well in Leclerc, and possibly some half-price engines. So if I'm Haas, I would definitely be looking at Leclerc and just finding any way really to get him into the team. Let's talk about the final team on the grid, unless I've horribly forgotten anyone, and that is Sauber. So I think probably the one that's hardest to predict on the grid. We know they have Honda engines. We know Ericsson is very in line with the owners. We know that these kind of seats could change any time. Might not be decided till January, or it might all be wrapped up by the summer. We really, really don't know with Sauber. I think Ericsson's going to stay because of the connections with their owners and kind of the confidence that they put in him, and he's a fairly competent driver as well. He's certainly, I think, improving quite a lot. Wehrlein definitely deserves a seat in Formula 1. Whether or not he stays with Sauber is another question. He certainly has the talent, but this kind of friction in the team, I mean, it's really tough. I mean, I'm going to say Ericsson and Wehrlein. It sounds strange to have so many predictions of teams keeping the same driver lineup, but for me, I'm going to say Ericsson and Wehrlein. Matt, what do you think of that prediction, and do you have anything different for Sauber?
I'm personally feel exactly the same, in all honesty. I think, we talk about these big moves with Raikkonen and Alonso leaving the spot, and I honestly don't believe that they're probably going to create as much drastic change across the grid as a lot of people obviously think it will. I think Sauber, usually if you see something like that, will be a team that ends up getting affected with it, but in some way or another. And as much as Ericsson and Wehrlein now are probably so worried that they're now probably with the worst chassis and now the worst engine as well, so they're going to be fighting to stay within the 107% rule. But I think, they're going to keep both of them next season.
I'm going to throw a little spanner in the works, and I'm going to bring Matsushita into play, and that's purely because he's a Honda driver. You know, he's funded through his GP2 career by Honda. So, obviously with the situation this year, Honda can't really push McLaren's buttons too much, I wouldn't have thought. With the partnership seeming fairly strained, but obviously with Honda probably providing, there'd be more on the table for Honda, I assume, at Sauber. So maybe if their heart's content, they may push through for a move for Matsushita at the expense of, largely depending on whether Wehrlein gets a seat elsewhere, say at Force India or something, or whether out of nowhere they decide to drop Ericsson. But I do agree with Josh, despite what I've just said, and I do believe that Sauber will stick with the same lineup.
Yeah, I think it's just so tough, isn't it, really, to see. I mean, of course, with McLaren, if they split up with Honda, Matty, does this kind of make it Sauber-Honda in terms of, you know, a real kind of alignment of those two teams? Or do you think Honda will kind of wait and partner up with someone, you know, maybe even start their own team, or, you know, partner with someone like Williams? Do you think it's more... Do you think, you know, that Honda leaving McLaren, does that change Sauber and Honda's relationship?
I think it will slightly, but I think Honda have more to worry about than who their factory team is, or whatever, or what kind of deals they have. They need to focus more on their engine before they decide to focus on any kind of advertising or trying to team up with a bigger team. I think it would be foolish for Williams to go with a Honda engine unless they were being given money by Honda to run it. And even in that situation, it would have to be a large amount of money. And I guess that's kind of what Sauber's gone with, because I can't see any other reason why Sauber would go with Honda other than it being much cheaper than the current 2-year-old Ferrari engine.
Yeah, and I guess in the current situation, they've got to change something, because, you know, if it goes wrong, well, they'll still be last. So I think a good move from Sauber. Benny, just to cap it all off then, your final prediction.
Yeah, in the end, I think they're gonna keep the same driver lineup, and if they don't, I think they're still gonna keep Wehrlein, as Mercedes might give some money to Sauber just to keep him in the sport. We know he's a great talent, and, you know, all the drives that he put in, you know, the amazing drives like back in Spain, you know, he got 7th or 8th, I think, in the end. A really good drive. And last year, I think everybody should remember in Austria when he got a point in the manner, like, mind blown moment. And I think that in the end he's gonna stay, because he hasn't got any other space left, you know. All of the other teams, kind of the big drivers, kind of have got preferred status over him, and I think it's really the only place he's got left. And as for Ericsson, he's also done a solid job so far, and I think he's just gonna stay.
Right, well, that pretty much wraps up all of our predictions, I believe. They should all, theoretically, hopefully, be on screen right now for you all to read and, kind of work out what we've predicted ultimately. Of course, I think, as we mentioned all the way through this podcast, really, it's so dependent on Raikkonen and Alonso. You know, if our predictions for one of those is kind of wrong, then pretty much all our predictions are probably going to be wrong, because it really, really does influence the rest of the grid. There'll probably be, you know, a couple more curveballs as well. You know, we are, of course, pretty early as well in the 2017 season, so, you know, I'm sure a lot more silly season stuff to come, both on this channel and, of course, and in the news as we head up to the summer break. Possibly by the mid-season break, we'll know the future of Alonso and Raikkonen as for 2018. So, very exciting times in Formula 1. Thank you so much, all of you, for watching, and thank you so much as well to the two Matt and Benny as well, for coming on here and putting your necks on the line for everyone to see. Probably watch this video back in 12 months and see how right or wrong we were, but I'm hopefully one of us was surely right. But that pretty much rounds out the video then, so unless you guys have anything else to say, it's goodbye from me.